Welcome to Business Leaders Podcast. We're here live at QalibreMD's office in Boulder, Colorado. I'm your host, Bob Rourke, and today on Business Leaders Podcast, where we have Elizabeth Mirowski, PhD. We're going to take and chat with her about her business. But, circling back to the podcast, we interview some of the best and brightest business owners and entrepreneurs in and around the state of Colorado. We talk about the ins and outs of running a business and being an entrepreneur. You can think of this as your back-of-the-napkin MBA taught by the top business leaders and entrepreneurs in the state of Colorado, the folks that are doing it and not talking about it every day. We talk about what to do and, as importantly, what not to do about growing, running, or starting a business. So we're incredibly fortunate. Elizabeth has taken time out of her day to visit with us. She is running the entire operation at the moment. It's Elizabeth Mirowski, PhD. And at QalibreMD, the strategy is to transform medical imaging from a simple diagnosis of a lesion to an exact diagnosis of what disease is present, at what stage, and to what extent in the body it is occurring. Their superior imaging standards certify the accuracy in imaging biomarkers to reduce unnecessary repeat scans and variability in diagnoses from one health center to another. They focus on making their standards easily adoptable for widespread implementation. Elizabeth, thanks so much for taking time.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
You bet. So this is going to be somewhat technical to start with. So QalibreMD starts with a Q, A-L-I-B-R-E.
Yes.
So for folks that are looking for Calibre, that's how you spell it. So tell me about Calibre.
So QalibreMD is a recent spin-off of a parent company called High Precision Devices. We are focused on providing medical standards to improve people's diagnoses. We spun off of High Precision Devices because we were medically focused, and we realized that it was a very different market from what the parent company was doing, and we needed to ramp up our efforts to meet what we see as the need and demand for radiologists to have more exact results in their diagnoses. And so we are actually also in the process of raising funds to be able to move quickly with the market.
As folks are going, okay, what was the need that QalibreMD started to solve, or the problem it started to solve?
So there's a movement in the radiology community to become more quantitative. And so what you think about when you think about radiology, it's basically a picture of what's going on in your body. And those pictures vary as you go from one MRI scanner to another, and they can vary from day to day. It still gives you a reasonably good picture of your body, but if you really want to do something quantitative, like watch how much a tumor is growing or reducing in size when you're taking treatment, it doesn't do very well unless you implement some standard, some ground truth value that lets you know that, for example, if you think about a picture and you have colors, right? Your shirt right now is blue, mine is orange. Well, if we switched them and yours was orange and blue, it's that whole dress issue that was in the media for a long time. Is it a blue dress or a gold dress, right? Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, they tweaked the numbers of what the colors looked like and produced a totally different result. And that can happen in MR. But if you put in basically a blue that says that blue is blue, then you can start relating everything off of that particular value or number or truth.
Yeah, it's basically, you see anybody that does a weighing on a scale, use 0 for tare before you weigh.
Yes.
And you think about, and for most of us, and me in particular, on the MRI, I don't think I've ever been exposed to an MRI. Didn't need to be, as far as I know. And so, you submit MRI as an MRI. But the reality is they're not. Because you could have an MRI on the East Coast and an MRI on the West Coast, and their 0 is not the same.
Yes.
And so what you guys were addressing, and so how did QalibreMD get involved? Did they develop this technology themselves?
No, we developed it jointly with the larger radiology community, the International Society for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine, and the Radiological Society of North America. And also, an important player in this is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. As you can see in their name, standards, things that are related back to NIST, give you a very good, well-known ground truth value. It's the 0. It's a true 0 on that tear of that scale that you're looking at.
You know, so for in the MRI world, so what, you know, for the consumer, you know, let's say you're a consumer that has a tumor of some description. You know, contrast, if you would, the before use of your technology perhaps to after adoption of your technology and what the consumer could expect on the outcome of the information.
So one of the things that you would see change is the ability for you to go to any MRI in the health system that you're in, the one closest to your house, or if you want to travel somewhere and get it done slightly further away and send it to the radiologist. With our technology, those will come back the same, and therefore you won't have to do a repeat scan. You won't get a misdiagnosis, you won't get 2 diagnoses, right? So if you go and get a second opinion, that second opinion is related to the fact that the image data comes back slightly differently. It'll always be the same image data.
Whereas the contrast is if you went to MRI A and they go, your tumor has not gotten bigger, and you conceivably could go to MRI B, and because of it's not being zeroed or maybe slightly different than A, you could say it's either grown or shrunk.
Yes.
Whether that's true or not is in question.
It's in question because you can make that MRI image look different, which changes the size simply by the parameters that you choose to acquire the image by. And so, yeah, this would enable volumetric analysis, seeing what the size of that tumor is more accurately. And so in today's day and age, you know, even I've had maybe 4 or 5 different payers and have been in 4 or 5 different health systems in the past 15 years. And so every time I go to a new place, I would have to get all of the image data taken again. And because they would say, well, that stuff was taken at a different facility, we can't look at it, we can't read it. And so we'll allow people to be able to do different payer systems and have that data be the same regardless of where they're getting their
You know, and I think about the confusion that sows, you know, between the care provider and the consumer. You know, I don't really know what you have, and we have to start all over again. You can't see progression at all. You know, and we talked about, we have some of the devices on the table here, and for the folks that are going to look at the video, I think, you know, I'm amazed. One of them looks like something from a Star Wars deal, and the other 2, well, they look like what they're designed to do. And so let's talk a little bit about the 2, well, actually there's 3 devices that you have here.
This one's actually one together. We put it onto one plate. It's specifically designed to fit into breast imaging coils.
Okay.
And so it's for characterizing how well, this particular device was developed to characterize how well tumor volume is assessed in breast tissue, and it's specifically for a clinical trial that is looking to try to graduate or develop new drugs to treat breast cancer, to reduce the size of the tumor to the point that when you extract it, you actually maintain as much of the breast as possible, and can do a minimally invasive surgery at that point. And so in order to know whether or not this drug is effectively killing the tumor, you need to be able to have a well-known ground truth value that tells you this is what your machine is reading today, and so therefore the error that you have on your volume assessment of your tumor is less than 2%.
You know, and I think about we were talking about the regimen for when you go in for mammographies. So you go to the physician, get a mammography ordered, you go in and get your mammogram, then the fun starts if they find something.
Yes.
You know, and then they try to assess, and then there's the biopsy, and then there's, I forget what's after that. But in these particular devices, you know, there's more going on here than just the shape.
Yeah.
Because what you were talking about is the materials that are inside here and what they replicate. Let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So what we've developed with this product is a fat tissue mimic, and it mimics human fat tissue. So one of the issues when you do breast imaging is that the fat can really obscure what you see in the image data and your ability to measure tumor size. So you need to be able to subtract that out. And so we've provided something in this particular device to be able to have people test how well their subtraction works in that image data. And then we also have other elements that we developed that mimic how much water diffuses in the body. So when you think about a tumor starting to grow, when it first starts to grow, there's a whole bunch of cells growing. And so it's very, very dense. And at that point, water actually diffuses slower. And so you can measure that with the MRI. And then as it becomes, as it grows and becomes edematous, which is typically later stages of cancer, edema is water. There's too much water in the cells. And so you start to see the diffusion of water go much more quickly in the body. And so you can stage cancer using how much, a measurement of how much water is diffusing in that cell.
And so when you get a diffusion measurement, so for the physician or the radiologist, which they're the same I suppose, is you get a mathematical representation.
Yes, you get a mathematical representation of where your stage of tumor is. And then you can, so sometimes what you'll see in anatomy too is when that cancer tumor starts to die, it doesn't mean that the whole volume gets smaller. You have that damaged dead tissue that's still there. And so in that case, you can also identify that based off of water diffusion.
And so then you can start to tell if you have an effect, even if it hasn't shrunk yet.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and I think about, you know, folks, if they're out there going like, I'm beginning to get in the weeds on the science. You know, in layman terms, what we were talking about before we started the show is the evolution between current mammograms and treatment and biopsy and all this other stuff to what would be basically, you could go in with a calibrated machine and eliminate or at least reduce a great deal of that whole trail of treatment.
Mm-hmm. The variability, definitely reduce it all and give a patient a better diagnosis.
You know, I you know, for anybody that's had cancer in their family, which I understand is, what is it, 1 in 6 or 1 in 4 Americans will either have it in their family or somebody they know.
Yes.
So that's effectively everybody.
Yeah.
You know, and it's been in my family, it's been in your family.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we focused a little bit on the mammogram side, but for the guys in the prostate space.
Yeah, we actually have a device specifically tailored to evaluate prostate imaging techniques. And so when you think about right now what the process is you have an elevated PSA and one that's suspicious, so then a prostate biopsy ensues, and that can be 14 needles that randomly assess, they take samples of the prostate, and so you don't really see the whole picture, you just see wherever that needle went. And there's a lot of problems with that technique. I mean, it's invasive. People oftentimes will get infections as a result of that. And so our device is meant to use, again, so water diffusion, watch water diffusion in the prostate, and you can then see the whole prostate and monitor it over time without having to do a needle biopsy. We're in the stages of trying to prove that we can do that by still having the sampling of the tissue and then correlate it to the MRI image data. And once we can get that to be consistent enough where we can get, we can get a number from the MRI that's consistent with prostate cancer of a specific stage, then we could reduce how many biopsies are needed.
You know, I think about, you know, the old comment said, you know, there's a lot of guys past 80 that will have prostate. You'll die with it, not from it.
Yes.
You know, and there's also the other version, that's the fast growing, that'll kill you for sure. And, you know, I think there's probably some level of resistance to, you know, with the notion, well, let's say it's 14 needles for a biopsy, and if your toes don't start to point toward each other, there's something wrong with you. You know, and you think about that as an impediment to get treatment. You know, and I think about what you're talking about is an enabler for more folks to feel more comfortable about getting, you know, the diagnosis and getting checked. You know, and guys, and ladies, when we're looking at these devices, what you may not be able to see is inside this particular device here, I can't lift this thing over here. What you don't see is there's some, if we get that close enough for the folks that are watching on the video, you can see there's different colors inside. That's your fat mimic, which you're patenting as well.
Yes, we have submitted a utility patent on that, and we're awaiting.
And so that'll be your standardization piece for there. And theoretically, if every MRI was to use this on day one, that all, theoretically, once they're done, they'd all be in, at least in tolerance.
Yes.
And so theoretically, you could go from MRI A to MRI B and get similar readings across the country.
Yes, and that's the idea. If also you have compliance, which is making sure that they use the correct protocols, because MRIs can have a whole slew of different protocols that you can use.
So for the folks that don't know what a protocol in an MRI is, what's a protocol?
Well, so it's, for the simple way, it's the knobs and where you turn the knobs on the machine to be able to get that image. You have, maybe 10 or 15 different knobs that you can change on that. And so if one site has them set to 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and then another site has it set to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're going to get a different answer.
Sure.
And so part of it is, along with our product, is giving the sites the best possible protocol for breast imaging, for example, and the best possible protocol that you can use for prostate imaging.
I just think about, and we talked about beforehand, is, random data is just noise. We were talking about signal to noise. And I think, for a lot of these machines and so on, that if you could get, the standardization like you're talking about, then it cuts down on the noise and you could actually tell signal. Where are most of these devices found right now?
Right now they're at the top research hospitals in the U.S. and throughout the world. So if you were to type in and look at Newsweek and see who the top hospital and research institutions are, we would pretty much be at all of those.
And so at this juncture, the local hospital, unless it's a research, is unlikely to be employing this particular.
Correct. And part of that is because we don't have the exacting protocol that we would like them to use. So we are in the process of developing them for specific cases, like there's neuroimaging so imaging of the brain, and there's several different types of brain ailments that are out there that you can image, and which protocol is best for which disease is yet to be determined.
And so we went on the brain, and we have this large round object, which doesn't look like it's heavy.
But it is.
But that thing's probably 10 pounds, 12 pounds.
Yeah.
And it looks like a very colorful Death Star. But each one, there's all these spheres inside this sphere. Ooh, my engineer would say I asked too much, and that would be then. So talk a little bit about the construct of this thing and why it is like it is.
So it's shaped the way it is because it's meant to fit into head coils.
Okay.
And it has 14 different spheres of different colors. You can see green, blue, and then the red, and then the yellow. And each one of those contain a different solution that gives you a different number that you should read on the MRI. So there's 42 different numbers. And when you get those all correctly done, and you want to look into the brain and go beyond imaging just the anatomy, and you want to start relating numbers to a tumor that you see in there, this is what you use.
So this is the calibration.
This is the calibration.
Because these are standard and they don't change.
Right. And so it tells you how much error from the machine there is, so that when you then put the human in there, you can say that my machine isn't the one that's causing this number to be so high or so low.
And so either you can tweak the machine to get the number proper, or you learn to adjust the numbers that you get after the reading from the standard.
From this, yeah.
And I think about folks are going MRI, and I didn't dig into that too very far. An MRI is just maybe a quick description so folks can get comfortable with what the MRI is.
So at the high level, it produces an image of your body. And it shows you, your soft tissue. It can show you some bone structure, and basically tells you this is what your body looks like on the inside. the way you get that image is by using a high magnetic field. And what you're looking at is your body is filled with water, and water chemically has two different atoms in it. It has a hydrogen atom and an oxygen atom. And specifically what MRI does is look at the hydrogen atom in your body. And so that hydrogen atom has a signal that it sends out when you're healthy, and it has a different signal that it sends out when you're not healthy. And so it kind of tells you what the environment locally in your body looks like. So you can see the image data, and okay, there I see a tumor in my brain. And then the question is that tumor growing, or is it dying? What's going on with that? Well, you can't tell right now, but the idea is that when you assign numbers, you can see whether part of the tumor is dying, whether it's growing. So if you're undergoing treatment and you want to know how well your treatment is doing, you could use MRI to stage that treatment and basically help you get feedback faster, which is really important when you think about cancer and how quickly cancer can grow. That knowledge of knowing whether something is working quickly is very important and crucial.
You know, shifting gears a little bit, we talked before the show about going from PhD type to entrepreneur. Tell me a little bit about that thought process and journey.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time working in the lab. I got my PhD and then proceeded to work in the lab in a small business startup in Longmont. I spent actually 2 years at the National Institute of Standards and Technology doing my postdoctoral work there. And one of the things that I learned as I went to NIST is that I liked the fact that it's under the Department of Commerce. And so what they're doing is related to what industry is doing. My PhD thesis was on a subject matter that I don't think I will see realized as a product in my lifetime. And so I felt I really wanted something more. And so when I went to NIST, I felt good about the fact that I was doing more that was industry related. And then I started to figure out that I really was interested in business and really making products work and making things sustainable and jobs and understanding accounting and I mean pretty much the whole gamut.
Did you have any of that in your career pursuit or your course pursuit?
I did not. I didn't have any of it, which is is interesting. And I had thought about well, should I go back for an MBA? But then I realized I didn't want to do more schooling.
Imagine that.
After a PhD, it's a lot of schooling, and then also I just find myself really thinking creatively, and so outside the box. So I gravitate towards the startup, the initiation of an idea, and taking it to product form, and that's where I thrive emotionally. That's where I find myself being happy.
It's folks. Folks have impressions of PhDs, and I don't know if Einstein comes to mind or not. I don't even think he was a PhD, was he? I don't know.
I'd have to look.
But we were talking just before the show and said some of your hobbies, you like to bow hunt.
Yes.
You like to fish.
Yep.
Climb.
Anything outdoorsy. I have a big nature side. I think a lot of people would notice that. All of my friends would say, you're outside. If you're not inside, you're outside. So
words to live by, right? And I think about, you were talking about the creative process, and maybe, when you were looking at this as a problem, take us to the thought process that led to the creation of some portion of this.
Back in 2007, the larger radiology community got together and said, MRI, we need to improve it. We need to improve what we get out of this MRI. It has so much more potential. And what we're seeing is, variability in diagnosis. We're seeing increased repeat scans that don't need to be done. And it's costing the healthcare system a lot. And so that was sort of the inception point of it. And being here in Boulder, Colorado, and fairly close to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, we were lucky enough to be able to do the very first prototype that was jointly designed by the larger community, the International Society for Magnetic Resonance Medicine and the Radiological Society of North America, and to commercialize that. And so we learned a lot in this prototyping. You have to make this product MRI compatible, so there's no metals, and we started off as a machine shop doing a lot of stuff with metals. And so in this case, it was, how do you get plastics, that are also going to hold this chemistry that's in there for a long enough time. And so building all of that was something that we contributed to it significantly, and that's kind of where that started. And then we continued to go down, and for the breast standard, we ended up applying for a small business innovation research grant, and we won that. And we went through phase 1 and phase 2, and we now have a product that we're selling to the market. And we're still looking to continue our sort of grant work through the NIH.
National Institute of Health.
National Institute of Health, and to try to really hone in on that application and what protocols people should use. What's the best methodology for you to implement our standards, and then apply that to the patient.
And you think about, so, guys, the colors are not just the colors. So you have all the chemical compositions, and then you talked about how you preserve the composition for durability, and the plastic doesn't affect the composition.
Yeah.
And I asked, I said, so was this, how was this built? And you guys are injection molding.
Yeah.
And so there's no metal, and there is no metal. It's all gaskets and whatnot, and machining and plastic. Well, and for a location that's using that particular device, what's the durability of the device? How long does it last?
So we've had a proven shelf life of 5 years on this.
Okay.
Because it's a standard, we're interested in not trying to make it last forever, because then it increases, as a manufactured product, the likelihood that it may have a problem. And then if you're a standards company, you can't have that problem at all.
Yeah.
And so what we're actually doing is we're developing a software platform to be able to rapidly analyze this and keep track of the daily data, and make it as easy for the MRI tech to do the analysis each day, just plug and play, put it in, run the protocols, and then get a report out that says you're okay to scan today. And we were looking at packaging that up as a service and the product all
Are you going to
together.
get the data back?
Yes, so it's a server that we have hosted on the cloud.
Okay.
And the idea would be that we would get the data back. We would know about the data.
That would be really good. Not only from just compliance with you're coming to the end of the life of that particular device, but also, what's the variability across the universe?
Yes.
On the machinery.
Right. And so when you think about big data science and companies that are trying to mine data that's image data, well, you need to, even though artificial intelligence and the computers can find some answer, you should at least make sure they're finding the exact answer on a known physical standard that's in that group.
Well, otherwise you just have the quality of your data is suspect.
Yes.
If it's not at standard.
Yes.
And we were talking even before, so you've got this large machine, and you're a radiologist or a number of practices, and you get your software upgrade package, which makes anybody or everybody should cringe, because you just don't know what you have. And we talked a little bit, what's some of the experiences that you've seen from folks doing software upgrades?
So we have seen that we've had customers call us and tell us there's something wrong with our product, and we say, no, there's nothing wrong with the product, send us the image data. And there's a halo of a rectangle in the image, and we trace it back to the software and how the software was seaming together the data from the different channels that it was looking at. And so it literally was a software, and when we told them to just click one button off to turn something off, it went away.
There's a hint.
Yeah.
And as you think about the acceptance and feedback from the current users, what's the biggest misconception that your current users had of this particular technology?
The biggest misconception is that the data coming from the MRI is always the same day to day and from site to site, and it's not.
And you think about practically speaking, like the tolerance on a car motor at 10,000 miles is not the same at 100,000 miles. Mm-hmm. And you think, well, why would you expect a piece of machinery like an MRI, to be consistent day in and day out. I mean, it seems strange to me. So for you, shifting gears again, so you're now in fundraise.
Yes.
You have a broad acceptance of your technology. What's next?
Well, when we get that funding in, it'll be hiring more people to really hit the ground running on developing the applications and getting one minimum viable product out there to the diagnostic market to eliminate variability in the diagnosis.
Okay.
And that's our goal, is really to stop that first problem. And then our second goal is that would reduce variability in just what the anatomy looks like for those images. But then the ultimate goal is to get those images to have numbers associated with them, much like a blood panel, where you have numbers that it says are normal, and then it compares what your blood number is. And so if we could then take image data and say, here's the anatomy, and then here's your tumor, and we're showing that 80% of it is dead and 20% of it is alive and it's dying, because we have numbers that tell us that. That's our end goal, is to enable that technology.
In the hoping, dreaming space, how long down the road do you think that will be?
It's hard to predict, but definitely in my lifetime.
Okay.
And definitely, there's already some people using those numbers, for example, to stage prostate cancer.
Okay.
So we're really trying to target those people and try to make sure their numbers are as accurate as possible and get our product to that. So it could be within the next few years as well, depending.
So for the folks out there, they're going to go, well, I want to make sure I want to go someplace that has this technology. And so their chances of finding this technology are greater at the big research hospitals than it is than your small local.
It is.
Yeah.
Exactly. But like one of our goals is to really try to see if there's a payer out there willing to work together with us and have it accepted in a health system, the entire health system. So that would be the best for us, because then we could get to those small hospitals faster.
When you talk about the process to acceptance by a healthcare system, how do you see that transpiring? What's their thought process, and what do they need to see in order for them to go, yeah, we need to do this?
Well, they always need to see that they're not wasting money on unnecessary diagnostics, on repeat scans, on diagnostic variability. If we can show that that we reduce their costs there, if we reduce any healthcare costs, then that's sort of the driving factor.
And I think about the things that drive that insight. Is gathering of data, being able to take and verify that you can say, you don't need to do that extra one because you don't need to do another one because your machine is out of sync. If you put it in sync, it'll reduce the number of these that you do again by this. That would seem to be apparent to me. Is it that they don't see her, or it's just not enough data yet to demonstrate that?
It's not enough data to demonstrate that. So we're really looking at what pilot study on a wide health system. And one of our grants that we applied for through the National Institute of Health is specifically to look at 25 different sites and accumulate some data from that.
Okay.
And so we've created the product. We've shown that it has enabled researchers to do a lot of new and exciting things. For example, reducing scan times from 45 minutes down to 5 minutes. And so our next step is, well, we've enabled the research community, so now we have to enable something in the diagnostic community. And so that's really, once we're done fundraising, we're going to be going towards that application.
As you were thinking about, or we were chatting before, and said this company was spun out, and so take us to that thought process between this was being put together inside, and then there was a decision to spin it out and go, there's a company in here. What was that decision like?
It was basically seeing that there is a larger market for this than any other product line that our parent company, High Precision Devices, had. And it was also related to the medical industry, which nothing else that we do is. So it requires things like ISO 13485 certification, CE marking. There's a lot more regulation associated in that realm. So we realized that we wouldn't want to put that onerous of a task onto the entire company, because it's not necessary and it's not cost effective. And so that was a primary driving factor for spinning it off, and also fundraising. So we can have people happy that they're not owning high precision devices, but they're actually owning CalibreMD.
What are you hearing from the potential investors? What's their typical response or commentary?
They're excited about the technology. Typically, the investors we've been speaking to want us to be further along than we are, which is always the case, and it's understandable. So really, we're kind of limited to the sort of accredited angel investor, and so that's not there aren't as many avenues that way as there are.
And so you're everything right now, right? CEOs, CFOs, everything else.
Well, so I'm not the CFO. I do a lot of the sales and marketing. I do the research and development, writing of the grants, project management of the grants, marketing, and yeah, that's plenty. I luckily have help in the manufacturing end. I have dedicated staff that put these together. And I have access, to engineers for refinements through HPD still, and they have been a tremendously great resource. And so we have a slightly different business model in terms of that. Is we spin it off, but we can still use the resources of HPD. So I still use all the I still know everybody in the purchasing department, and so I don't do everything. I just do sort of that specific to this product line stuff.
And I think for some of the folks listening, I have this idea, and then all of a sudden your idea comes to fruition, and so you're sitting here day 2 after the spin out. What was that thought process like day 1, being the CEO of CalibreMD?
It didn't hit. I just kept thinking, this is what I have to do. Like what I don't think about the titles as much as I think about the tasks that need to get done.
Yeah, I've got to pick this up. I have to sweep that up. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that does not change as the owner, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, so, and to kind of bring this to a close, we've been at this for a while. How many of these types of units are out there on the planet right now?
So we have about 150 units out there.
Okay.
Yeah, and so which is 150 different sites throughout the world. We're in Europe, South America, Australia, Japan, Korea, China.
Before I forget, so somebody says, I need to know more. How do they find you? What's the best way to find you?
Well, you can contact us through our website, which is www.calibre-md.com, and Calibre is spelled a little funny. It's QALIBRE-MD.com. All
right. And so that I was on the site, and you can see closer some of the devices, and that's kind of cool. It's a pleasure, and you're very generous with your time, and I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time and your patience.
Thanks very much.